We're seeing a lot of protests here and around the world that are against. But is it enough to be against? Don't you sometimes have to be for? We'll hear about that next on Global Perspectives.
This program is made possible in part by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India program at UCF.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. More than 100 years after legendary peace activist Mahatma Gandhi talked about resisting injustice with nonviolence, much of the world remains in the grip of oppression. However, recent events in North Africa and the Middle East have reminded us that Gandhi's advice is still timely and effective. Most of the demonstrations have had peaceful origins, despite the violent turn in countries such as Libya and Syria after their governments cracked down. Is it possible for nonviolent protesters to adhere to their peaceful ideals when governments respond with such brutality?
What kind of power? People power!
Beyond the Middle East and North Africa, are we witnessing a new peace movement to correct long-standing global political, economic, and social problems? Today's guest has unique credentials to help us understand these challenges. Arun Gandhi, the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, is himself a peace activist and adheres to a path of nonviolence. In 1991, Gandhi and his late wife, Sunanda, founded the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence. Welcome, Mr. Gandhi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Take us back to the beginning of your experience with the concept of nonviolence. Where were you and how did you initially respond to it?
Well, I was born in a family that believed in nonviolence. So ever since I was born, my parents practiced nonviolence at home, nonviolent parenting, which is the foundation of my understanding of his philosophy of nonviolence. And then at the age of 12, I went to India after some sad experiences in South Africa with physical beatings, first by whites and then by blacks, both the times because they didn't like the color of my skin. I was enraged and I wanted to die for an eye justice, and that's when my parents decided to take me to India. And the first lessons that grandfather taught me about understanding anger and being able to channel that energy into positive action, I think laid the foundations of my understanding of his philosophy.
Now, this is really much more than just a concept or a way of dealing with conflict, a conflict resolution approach, if you will. It's really a way of life.
It is. It is. I think you know, the one mistake that everybody has made ever since his passing away is to just look at that philosophy as a conflict resolution philosophy, and especially in political conflicts, because he used it in that context, and then Dr. Martin Luther King used it in this country to gain civil rights. So it has been used in many places, but only for political conflicts. And so people have just, you know, compartmentalized it, and they feel that it's only for political conflicts there. But I feel that we have to look at the larger picture, that we have created around us a culture of violence, a culture that dominates every aspect of our life. Our entertainment, our sports, our language, everything is dominated by this culture of violence. So if we subscribe to a culture of violence on the one hand, and then expect to resolve conflicts peacefully or non-violently on the other, it doesn't always work. It may work in certain specific cases for a temporary period of time, but it's not a lasting solution. The lasting solution is not just to learn how to resolve conflicts, but to learn how to avoid conflicts. And if we can create a society where conflicts are minimized, there are not so many conflicts emerging all the time, then we would be able to create peace and harmony in the world.
How do you respond to people who may not see this culture of violence that you've described, who may not believe it's a problem? How do you begin to persuade them that we have to try a different approach?
Well, I look at myself as a peace farmer. Just as a farmer, agricultural farmer goes out into the fields and plants seeds and hopes and prays that they will germinate and get a good crop from it. So I go out and I plant these seeds in the minds of young people, and I hope that they will think about it and let it germinate so that they can understand the philosophy and practice it effectively. Because I think that unless you understand the entire philosophy and practice it, it won't be easy to use it, at given moments.
How do you avoid being discouraged? Because this culture of violence is like a giant beast, and you're sort of blowing into the wind.
Yes, it is sometimes very very disheartening, but then my grandfather always told us that we should have expectations that are attainable, and then keep building on that. Once you attain one level, you get to the next level. But if I have expectations that are not attainable, and if I think that my presence here will change every student in this university, it would be ridiculous, and I know that it won't happen there. And then I would be disappointed. But if I come here and I know that I'm going to speak to the student body and that I'm going to plant some seeds there, and some of them may be affected and they might think of looking deeper into what I have said. And that's fine with me. That's what I expect, just a few people to look deeper into this.
How would you advise somebody who would say to you, in this culture of violence, embracing anger is easy? In fact, it's often encouraged. And how do you sort of pull yourself back from that impulse to be angry, or to respond in an angry fashion?
Well, I think if we have to weigh our hopes and expectations of society. If we think that we are civilized human beings, if we are creating a civilized society, then violence and killing each other is not part of civilization. It's not human. It's inhuman, and so they both don't mesh together there. We have to, if we really believe in civilization, then we have to create a civilization where people live in peace and harmony, and not, killing each other and destroying each other. It's going to take a long time to do that. It's not going to happen overnight, or even in my generation, or the generation of the younger students today. But somebody has to make a beginning. And if it's only when we make that beginning that the journey, as the Chinese say, the journey begins with the first step.
Tell us how it worked for you. You described an angry young man who wanted to respond with an eye for an eye. How much time did it take for you to make the transition from that response to anger to...
Well, this is a lifelong transition, and even though I'm now 78, I can't say that I have learned it completely and that I don't need to learn it anymore, because every day I encounter new situations and new episodes that generate anger in me. So it's always a challenge to be able to use that energy of anger constructively and positively, rather than abuse that energy and cause death and destruction. So my grandfather didn't suggest this, and I'm not suggesting that anger is something evil, that we need to suppress it. Anger is a wonderful emotion. It's like fuel to an automobile. If you don't have fuel, it's not going to run anymore. And so anger is the fuel that makes us do things and work. So we need to use that anger intelligently and constructively rather than abuse it. And so that's what I learned, and every day I try to practice that, and I try to improve on it.
I can't even imagine you angry, but what makes you angry? And what would be an example of a situation where you took that anger and moved it in a constructive direction?
Well, one of the things that happened to me was, as I said, I was beaten up, and both the times because of the discrimination and prejudices people felt against me. And I realized that instead of seeking revenge and hating those who hated me, that I need to transform them. And the only way I can transform them is through love and understanding and approaching them. So I've devoted my life to bridging the gaps that exist between people and trying to make them understand that we are all human beings, that we shouldn't look at each other by the labels that we have put upon each other, but look at each other as human beings.
As you look around the world today, where are the places where you are inspired by what people are doing in terms of this philosophy?
Well, there are lots of people in every country that I've gone to where they are doing little things individually or collectively to bring about a transformation and change in society there. And that's what really keeps me encouraged, that there are. And even today, when I go to India, I take a group every year on a Gandhi Legacy tour. And one of the things that we do is to go and see the projects that people have individually or collectively started to transform the Indian society. They work in the slums, they work among the poor in the villages, and they are doing some amazing work. And that kind of work I've seen in every country. Every individual has gotten involved in doing that kind of transformational work there. And that gives me courage and encouragement that there are good people who are doing good things, and we just need to expand that and make more people do good things instead of doing bad things.
Where does the responsibility lie for assisting with this transformation? Is it mostly in education, or is it everywhere?
I think it's everywhere. I think education plays a very important role because the educational institutions are responsible in molding the character of a child right from the beginning. And so they need to look at education in a more broader sense. I am very disturbed by the fact that the educational institutions are only thinking of giving young people a career and sending them out into the marketplace to make money. That's the whole basis of the education system. What it should be is building the character of the people and showing them their own, selves and their responsibility to societies and all that, and bridging the gaps that exist between people. So it should be a holistic type of education, which unfortunately is lacking.
So what you're talking about ideally would be infused into the entire system, but is it also helpful to have certain courses, maybe even required courses, that would help people expand their thinking?
Yeah, there should be some required courses. One of the things that I insist young people should be taught about is anger management. We don't teach it, we don't even talk about it, and we try to ignore it, and yet anger it contributes to so much of violence in our personal as well as national lives. So that is something that I would say should be compulsory for all children to learn, right from the kindergarten age right up to the university level. They should be taught about this. Then there are other things that they need to learn about individuals and society and the self and the different ethnic groups and things. And learn in a broader sense, you know, like my grandfather said in terms of religion, he said that lots of critical studies of religion are made, but not many friendly studies are made. And that is what we need to do. We need to make a friendly study of religions, not nitpicking, not looking at the bad parts of a religion or a society, but looking at the good things and highlighting the good things from it so that we can learn from the good things that exist in every society.
You talked about the education of young people. What about the education of those who are beyond the school system, even beyond higher learning? How do we reach them?
Education is a lifelong process, and unfortunately, people don't realize that because they think that education is only coming to schools, and once you get your degree, you are done with education, and that's it. And that's not it. That's the beginning of education is after you get your degree and go out into society and interact with people. And you know, every incident and every person you meet is a potential for learning and broadening your perspective. But that can happen only if you have that kind of a mindset and an open mind to absorb all these things from society and from people you meet and interact with. But if we have a closed mind, then we are not going to absorb anything, and it's, you know, the mind is going to languish. So it's very important, and that's part of the education system, that they need to be taught from the beginning that what they learn in the books and textbooks is only part of the education. What they learn outside is going to help them more in interacting and relating to people.
We have a lot of protests going on in the world today, from the business-oriented Occupy Wall Street type demonstrations to political activism that has led to governmental changes in North Africa and the Middle East, among other places. Are those catalysts for even more significant change in your mind, or are they different types of events?
Well, they are the catalyst for change. There's no doubt about that, because people are tired and fed up with the system that exists. They've seen the evils of that system and they want to change those systems. But it's very important to remember in a nonviolent struggle that it's easy for us to be against something, but what we need to project to society and to people who are going to be affected by this change is, what are we for? You know, like the Wall Street demonstration, for instance, they have made it very clear what they are against, but they have not made clear what they are for. And I think that's where the movement is lacking. And if they make that clear, then it will be easier for people to join and to promote and help that protest movement. But until then, you know, people are just going to be sitting on the sidelines and not knowing what they should do. So it's very important for these kinds of protest movements not simply to go out into the streets and protest, but to have a plan of action. That it's fine to protest, but if we want to change that system, what do we want to change it to, and how is that going to be implemented, and so on. So that plan of action, it's something like a military action. You know, we just don't walk into a battlefield and start fighting. There's a whole plan that is made out, and objectives and all of that is you know, worked out and planned before we send armies out there. So in the same way, a nonviolent action should not be spontaneous and just walking out into the streets and protesting and so on. It should be more planned.
As you look to the decades ahead, are you optimistic or pessimistic? It seems to me, you talk about this culture of violence, and it seems that we have been barreling along in a more violent direction with each passing decade of late. How do we try to see beyond that to this nonviolent environment you've discussed?
Well, I think when individuals come to realize that this path that we have taken is wrong, that it's leading us to destruction, self-destruction, and that we need to change course, then people will start changing course. And I see this happening more and more when I see young people, tired of the way things are going, and they want to change, and they're looking for ways to change it. And so there is hope in people, and I hope that that will spread, and all of us will come to realize that living, peace through the barrel of the gun is no peace at all. That's the peace of the graveyard. We don't want that kind of peace. We want peace where people can live without guns and in greater harmony and understanding of each other. So, and that can be created if we want it to.
At the moment, there are protesters in various places that are looking down the barrel of the gun, and some of them are dying. In the process of nonviolence, what should you have to endure to live up to your principles?
This is going to happen because those who are in power want to retain their power. They feel threatened by people who are protesting against them. So they're going to use every possible means to crush them and stop this whole movement. But if you believe in what you want, then you should be willing to die for it. Just as a soldier that goes out into the battlefield there, the soldier knows that he or she is going to die in that battle. But they go in, with the intention of winning the struggle there. So in the same way, the nonviolent protesters must realize that this is a battle against two giants there, and the only difference is that you are not willing to kill, but you are willing to die for what you want to stand for. And that is where your strength lies. Napoleon, who was such a great general, military general, he wrote in his book on war that the general that holds the initiative will win the war. And those who have weapons, sophisticated weapons, they hold the initiative. Nonviolent strugglers in that sense don't have any initiative because they don't have weapons. But they have to seek initiative in the fact that they are going to fight with love, whereas these people are going to fight with hate and destruction. And so, it needs a lot more moral strength to stand for something you believe in. And one should have that moral strength if they want to achieve good things in life.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mr. Gandhi.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on your show.
And thank you. For the Global Perspective Show, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible in part by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India program at UCF.